this episode, we're going to tackle a privacy program challenge that sits right at the boundary between intention and reality, proving that policies are actually being followed. Writing a policy is relatively easy compared to ensuring thousands of daily decisions across teams and vendors line up with that policy, especially when people are busy and systems are complex. Beginners often assume that if a policy exists and training was delivered, compliance naturally follows. Yet real compliance is something you measure, verify, and reinforce over time. Measuring policy compliance is not about catching people to punish them. It is about detecting drift early, confirming that controls operate as designed, and giving leaders the evidence they need to manage risk responsibly. In a mature privacy program, you do not rely on optimism or on the absence of complaints as proof, because problems can be hidden for a long time. Instead, you use structured tests, attestations, and validation methods that translate policy statements into observable proof. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at Cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Policy compliance measurement starts with a clear understanding of what a policy is actually trying to control, because policies are often written in broad language that must be turned into specific behaviors and controls. A policy might say personal data should only be used for defined purposes, but what does that mean operationally for a team that wants to reuse a dataset for analytics? A policy might say access should be restricted to those who need it, but what does that mean for permission groups, admin roles, and temporary project access? A policy might say data should be retained only as long as necessary, but what does that mean for logs, backups, and vendor platforms? If you cannot translate the policy into testable statements, you cannot measure compliance. You can only claim it. The first job is therefore to break policy into control objectives, which are the specific outcomes you expect, like identity verification is performed before account data is disclosed, or vendor processors are bound by current data processing terms, or deletion jobs remove records older than the retention threshold. These objectives become the anchors for measurement. Tests are one of the most direct ways to measure compliance because they involve checking reality against expectations using evidence. A test can be technical, like verifying that access control groups match role requirements, or operational, like reviewing case files to confirm that rights requests were handled according to procedure. Tests can also be process-based, like confirming that new vendors cannot be on board without completing privacy review and security assessment steps. The strength of a test is that it produces observable results, but tests require planning because you need to decide what to test, how often, and what evidence counts as proof. Tests should also be designed to reflect risk, meaning you test more often and more deeply where the harm would be greater, such as systems that hold sensitive data or workflows that involve external sharing. A common beginner mistake is running tests only when an audit is coming, which creates a frantic, reactive culture. Regular testing turns compliance into a steady health check instead of a last-minute scramble. Attestations are different from tests because they rely on people affirming that a control or practice is in place, and they can be powerful when used thoughtfully but weak when used as a substitute for evidence. An attestation might involve a system owner confirming that access reviews were completed, a product owner confirming that new collection points were reviewed for transparency requirements, or a vendor manager confirming that contracts include required clauses. Attestations help scale compliance measurement because you cannot test everything constantly with a central team, especially in large organizations. However, attestations must be designed carefully so they are not vague, because vague attestations produce false comfort. The best attestations are specific, time-bounded, and tied to artifacts, such as requiring the owner to reference the location of the access review record or the ticket number for a completed vendor assessment. This keeps attestations honest and makes them easier to validate later. When attestations are paired with spot checks, they become a scalable tool that builds shared accountability. Control validation methods sit between tests and attestations, and they focus on confirming that controls are operating effectively, not just that they exist. A control can exist on paper but fail in practice, like a procedure that nobody follows or a system configuration that is technically enabled but easily bypassed. Validation can include sampling case files to confirm that verification steps are actually recorded, or reviewing export logs to confirm that data is not being shared through unapproved pathways. It can include checking whether retention jobs ran and whether data older than the retention period is truly removed, not simply flagged. It can include examining whether vendor deletion requests are tracked and confirmed rather than assumed. Validation often uses multiple evidence sources so you can triangulate reality, such as comparing policy requirements to system configurations and then to operational records. This triangulation is what makes validation defensible because it reduces dependence on any single source that could be incomplete. Validation also reveals whether controls are robust or fragile, which helps leaders decide where to invest. A practical way to build a compliance measurement program is to start by identifying your highest impact policies and the controls that implement them. For example, policies related to data subject rights, breach response, external sharing, retention, and access control usually deserve early attention because failures in these areas can cause direct harm and significant regulatory exposure. Once you pick the policies, you define the specific control objectives and then choose appropriate measurement methods for each one. Some objectives are best measured with technical tests, such as verifying access control configurations, while others are best measured with operational sampling, such as reviewing rights case files. Some objectives may be measured with attestations supported by artifacts, such as managers confirming that contractor access reviews were performed. The program should also define frequency, because some controls require frequent checks, like incident response readiness, while others can be checked on longer cycles, like annual policy review. This structured selection prevents the program from measuring everything shallowly and instead measures the most important areas deeply and consistently. Sampling is critical in compliance measurement because you need a method that scales without losing credibility. Sampling means selecting a subset of cases, records, or events and checking them against control objectives, then using results to infer broader performance. The sampling approach should be documented, not improvised, so teams trust the results and so repeated measurement can show trends. Risk-based sampling often makes sense, such as selecting cases that involve deletion requests, sensitive data, or vendor involvement, because those are more likely to reveal meaningful gaps. Sampling should also cover different teams and regions where applicable, because compliance drift can be localized, with one business unit performing well and another lagging. A beginner mistake is sampling only the easiest cases, which produces flattering results without revealing weak spots. A mature program uses sampling to find problems early, not to create a report that looks clean. When sampling is disciplined, it becomes a powerful way to monitor compliance at scale. Compliance measurement also needs clear pass and fail criteria, because without those, results become subjective and debates replace improvement. For each control objective, you define what counts as evidence of compliance and what counts as non-compliance, including what counts as partial compliance. For example, a rights fulfillment case might be considered compliant only if verification is documented, the system search scope is complete, the response is sent within required time, and the outcome is recorded with evidence. If a case meets the timeline but lacks verification documentation, that might be a fail or at least a significant partial, depending on your criteria. For external sharing, compliance might require that the vendor agreement includes required processing terms, that sharing scope is documented, and that onward transfer controls are in place. Clear criteria also support fairness because teams know what they are being measured against and can improve intentionally. Criteria should be stable enough to support trend analysis, but they can be updated when legal changes or program improvements require higher standards. When criteria are clear, compliance measurement becomes a shared language rather than a surprise judgment. Another essential component is evidence management, because compliance measurement produces artifacts that must be stored and handled responsibly. Evidence includes system reports, screenshots, logs, case files, attestations, and validation notes, and some of that evidence can contain personal data. The privacy program must apply minimum necessary principles to evidence collection, meaning you collect only what you need to prove the control and avoid creating new copies of sensitive data. Evidence should be stored in controlled locations with limited access and defined retention, because compliance evidence that sits in unmanaged folders becomes a privacy risk itself. The program should also define how evidence is linked to findings and remediation actions, so you can track improvement and demonstrate that issues were addressed. Evidence management turns compliance measurement from informal checking into defensible governance. Without evidence management, the program may have opinions but cannot prove what it observed. Compliance measurement is only useful if it drives corrective action, because finding issues without fixing them simply documents risk. A mature program defines a remediation workflow that assigns ownership, sets timelines, and requires proof of completion, especially for high-risk gaps. If measurement reveals that access reviews are overdue, remediation might involve completing reviews, removing stale access, and improving the review process so it does not fall behind again. If measurement reveals that rights cases lack consistent verification, remediation might involve updating training, improving intake workflows, and adding required fields in case management to prevent missing steps. If measurement reveals uncontrolled exports, remediation might involve tightening permissions, adding approvals, and providing safer reporting tools. Remediation should be tracked like any operational work, with escalation when deadlines are missed, because compliance gaps rarely fix themselves. When measurement is tied to follow-through, leaders see it as a management tool, not a complaint generator. It is also important to recognize that compliance measurement can reveal process design problems rather than individual negligence, and the program should treat findings as signals for system improvement. If people routinely bypass an approved tool, that may mean the approved tool is too slow or lacks features teams need. If people fail to record steps in a process, that may mean the process is too complex, the case tool is poorly designed, or training does not match reality. If contractors struggle to follow escalation pathways, that may mean they do not have access to official channels or their onboarding is incomplete. A beginner mistake is reacting to every compliance gap with more training, but training alone rarely fixes structural barriers. Compliance measurement should therefore include root cause analysis that asks why the gap occurred and what change would prevent recurrence. When you solve root causes, compliance improves naturally because the right behavior becomes easier than the wrong behavior. Reporting compliance results to leaders requires careful framing because leaders need clarity without noise and accountability without blame culture. Reports should highlight major trends, high-severity gaps, and progress on remediation, rather than listing every minor issue. Leaders also need to know which gaps represent control failures versus documentation failures, because the remedy differs. Reports should connect gaps to risk and to concrete decisions, such as funding automation for rights fulfillment or tightening vendor onboarding gates. It is also useful to report positive trends, like improved verification documentation rates or reduced repeat incidents, because that shows the program is learning and strengthening. The goal is to make compliance reporting a steady governance rhythm rather than a periodic shock. When leaders see consistent, evidence-based reporting, they are more likely to support the investments needed to improve controls. A strong compliance measurement program also includes periodic validation of the measurement methods themselves, because measurement can drift or become misaligned as the organization changes. If the organization adopts new systems, you may need new tests and new evidence sources. Otherwise, measurement will miss major areas. If the organization expands into new jurisdictions, compliance criteria may need updates to reflect new obligations. If teams change workflows, older tests may no longer reflect real risk and may create false comfort. Programs should therefore review their control objectives, tests, and attestation questions periodically, ensuring they still capture what matters and still produce useful signals. This review also helps reduce measurement burden by retiring metrics that no longer drive decisions and focusing effort on areas with the highest risk and change velocity. When measurement evolves thoughtfully, it stays relevant and trusted, which encourages participation rather than resistance. Trust in measurement is what makes people act on it rather than argue with it. As you bring this episode to a close, remember that measuring policy compliance is how privacy programs move from written intentions to operational proof. Tests provide direct evidence by checking systems and records against specific control objectives, while attestations scale accountability by asking owners to confirm control operation with supporting artifacts. Control validation methods connect these approaches, triangulating evidence to confirm that controls are not only present but effective in real workflows. Sampling, clear criteria, and disciplined evidence management make measurement practical, fair, and defensible, while remediation workflows ensure findings translate into real improvement rather than lingering risk. When compliance measurement is designed as a steady program, it becomes a feedback loop that strengthens controls, reduces incidents, and builds leader confidence. That is the core of governance, not assuming compliance, but proving it and improving it continuously.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.